The storm outside felt like it was tearing the world apart. Rain hammered the hospital window with merciless force, as if mocking the fragile silence inside. Ethan sat beside his mother's bed, holding her trembling hand. She had once been his light, full of warmth and laughter. Now her eyes dimmed, closing for the last time, leaving him in a darkness so heavy it nearly suffocated him. At 18, he thought he still had years with her, but cancer had stolen everything without mercy. The funeral came too soon. The chapel was cold, the air heavy with flowers that smelled of endings rather than beginnings. Ethan stood alone, numb, as relatives whispered their condolences, voices fading like echoes in a cavern. His father appeared at the service, older, lined with guilt and sorrow. They had been apart since the divorce when Ethan was only a child, and their bond had never been repaired. Ethan barely recognized the man who stood at the edge of the crowd, looking at him with a pain that felt foreign. When the lawyer read the will, Ethan learned what he hadn't expected. His mother had written clearly her son must live with his father in Seattle. No exceptions. It was not a suggestion, but a final request. A thread meant to tie him to a future he had not chosen. He packed what little he had left, clothes that still smelled faintly of her, and boarded a bus north, staring out at gray skies that matched the emptiness inside. Seattle felt like another planet. The city lights reflected against wet streets, unfamiliar and sharp. His father greeted him at the door, hesitant, as though afraid his son might vanish again. Yet what struck Ethan most wasn't his father. It was the stranger standing beside him. Marcus, his father's new husband. The house was immaculate, filled with framed photographs of smiling faces that didn't include him, wedding portraits on the wall, memories he had never been part of. Marcus welcomed him with gentle words, but Ethan barely nodded. To him, this man was an outsider, a replacement, an intruder in a life already broken. He walked through the halls like a guest in a museum of someone else's joy, each photograph another reminder of what he had lost. That night, the walls felt tighter than any coffin. Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the laughter that once filled his mother's kitchen. The emptiness that replaced it now. Sleep never came. The clock ticked endlessly, dragging him deeper into restless thoughts. Finally, unable to stay still, he wandered toward the faint light glowing from the kitchen. Marcus stood there alone, sleeves rolled up, the smell of warm sugar drifting through the air. He was baking cookies in the middle of the night, as though the act itself was a quiet rebellion against sorrow. Ethan froze at the doorway, unsure if he should turn back. Marcus looked up, eyes kind, a small smile softening the silence. "Can't sleep," he asked gently, then motioned with a nod. "Come here." For the first time since his mother's passing, Ethan felt the weight in his chest shift ever so slightly. He didn't move right away, but something in Marcus's calm presence, something in the quiet way he offered space without demand, planted the first fragile seed of belonging. Life had shattered in the rain, but maybe, just maybe, the pieces could be reshaped. Loss had taken everything he knew, yet destiny had delivered him into a home where a new story waited to be written. And if you want to follow the rest of Ethan's journey, from grief into love, from fear into family, stay with Heart Stories. Because sometimes the people who enter your life when you least expect it become the ones who heal you. At that moment, Ethan learned his first lesson even in the darkest nights. Kindness has the power to keep the soul from breaking completely. In the first weeks, Ethan kept his distance. He spoke little at meals, his eyes fixed on his plate rather than the two men across from him. His father tried awkward conversations, but it was Marcus who understood the silence. He did not force Ethan to talk. Instead, he moved quietly through the house, present but never demanding. It was in that quietness that Ethan began to notice the small ways Marcus held the family together watering plants in the morning, leaving the porch light on when Ethan stayed out late, and baking those same cookies that filled the kitchen with warmth on nights when sleep was hard to find. One evening, Marcus sat across the table with a stack of old photo albums. Instead of showing his own life, he spoke of the years when he had been cast aside. He told Ethan that when he came out as gay, his family shut their doors. Friends he had grown up with turned their backs during the worst of the AIDS crisis. He had buried people he loved while the world looked away. He did not tell the story to win sympathy. He told it as a truth that shaped him, a truth that taught him resilience. For the first time of him, Ethan saw Marcus not as a rival for his father's love, but as someone who had endured storms of his own. Slowly, while Ethan's walls thinned, Marcus noticed his camera sitting untouched in a corner of his room and asked about it. Ethan confessed he used to love capturing light and shadows, but grief had stolen that joy. Marcus surprised him by placing a book of photography on the table the next morning. Later, he introduced Ethan to a small group of young people in the city, an LGBTQ+ youth circle where laughter rose unashamed, where identities were not whispered but spoken with pride. Ethan left those gatherings with a strange lightness he hadn't felt in months, as if some hidden part of him had been allowed to breathe again. School, however, was less forgiving. Whispers followed him down hallways. That kid has two dads. Some sneered. Locker doors slammed louder when he passed. The names were cruel, but Ethan clenched his fists, swallowing the shame that threatened to rise. At home, he said nothing, determined not to burden Marcus or his father. But Marcus noticed the heaviness in his shoulders. He never pressed, simply reminded Ethan, strength is not about silence. Strength is about refusing to let their words define you. The test came during Thanksgiving, when relatives gathered around a long table heavy with food and forced politeness. At first, the conversations were stiff, uneasy glances darting toward Marcus and Ethan's father. Then one uncle, his voice sharp with disdain, cut through the air. He called their family unnatural, a sickness dressed as marriage. Forks clattered. The room froze. Ethan's chest burned with a fury he could no longer hide. He rose to his feet, every eye turning toward him. His voice trembled, but did not break as he declared, I am gay. If this family cannot accept that, then it is not me who needs to leave. Silence stretched like glass ready to shatter. His father sat in shock, words trapped in his throat. Beneath the table, Marcus reached for Ethan's hand, steady and unshaken. That small gesture became the anchor that kept him standing. The uncle, red-faced, muttered curses and stormed out, leaving the rest of the family in stunned quiet. For Ethan, it was a moment that changed everything. For the first time, he had not only defended himself, but also claimed his truth without apology. When he sat down again, his heart still pounded, but his shoulders no longer sagged under the weight of shame. Marcus gave a slight nod, pride glowing in his eyes. That night, Ethan realized that courage does not appear in grand victories, but in moments when fear demands silence and the heart chooses to speak instead. He had spent so long hiding pieces of himself, yet in claiming them, he discovered a strength that no insult could take away. It was Marcus's quiet presence, his stories of survival, and his steady hand that had taught him, this love is not loud, but it builds the courage to face the world. Winter rain swept across Seattle, but for Ethan, the world began to open in unexpected colors. It started in the photography club, where he met Jordan, a classmate with the same restless curiosity for capturing fleeting light. Jordan's smile carried a freedom that felt both dangerous and irresistible. They began walking together after school, comparing photographs, laughing at failed shots, finding beauty in small details others missed. For Ethan, whose life had been shadowed by grief and whispers, the connection felt like sunlight breaking through a heavy sky. Marcus noticed the change without needing to be told. Ethan returned home with a brightness in his eyes, his camera finally alive in his hands. One evening, while washing dishes side by side, Marcus said quietly, "Love is worth the risk, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise." His words carried the weight of experience, and Ethan stored them close to his heart. But joy rarely came without resistance. Whispers spread through school corridors, sharper than before. Students noticed the glances between Ethan and Jordan, the way they lingered together after class. One afternoon in the locker room, Ethan found himself cornered by a group of boys. Their laughter was cruel, their word venomous, just like your dad's. One sneered, "Sick. Doesn't belong here." A fist slammed into a locker beside his head, the metallic echo ringing louder than their insults. Fear tightened his chest. But before the blow could land, Jordan appeared. He shoved back, defiance burning in his eyes, and dragged Ethan out into the hallway. Together they ran until the shouts faded behind them. The adrenaline left Ethan trembling. That evening, he broke down in Marcus's arms, his defenses stripped bare. "I'm scared," he admitted, voice breaking under the weight of what he had endured. Marcus held him firmly, his voice steady. "Fear is real," he said, "but fear must never be allowed to rule. You are not alone. You have me. You have your father. And now you have Jordan. Don't let their hate steal what makes you whole." Days later, Ethan and Jordan walked along the Seattle waterfront. The city lights stretched across the water like a shimmering ribbon, the night carrying the scent of salt and rain. They said little, letting silence speak where words felt too fragile. Then Jordan reached out, his hand brushing against Ethan's. For a moment, Ethan hesitated, afraid of being seen, afraid of what it might mean. But the warmth of that touch dissolved his fear. Fingers intertwined, steady and sure. Jordan whispered softly, "With you, I feel free." It was a moment small in the eyes of the world, but for Ethan it was monumental. Freedom did not arrive in grand declarations, but in the quiet courage to hold someone's hand in the dark and know it mattered. From that night, Ethan began to understand that love was not only about happiness, but also about resilience. The world could bruise, mock, and threaten, yet love, true love, carried the strength to rise against it. The lesson unfolded not in classrooms or sermons, but in the lived reality of facing cruelty with companionship, of finding bravery in shared laughter, and of daring to believe that his heart deserved to be seen. Life had only just begun to feel balanced when the ground shifted again. Ethan had found joy with Jordan, discovered courage within himself, and learned to see Marcus as more than just his father's husband. Yet the fragile calm cracked the day Marcus collapsed in the kitchen. The sound of glass shattering on the floor drew Ethan and his father rushing in, only to find Marcus pale and unsteady. The hospital test came quickly, and the verdict cut like a knife: lymphoma in its early stage. For Ethan, the words awakened old nightmares. The sterile corridors, the sharp smell of antiseptic, the beeping of machines, all of it pulled him back to the memory of his mother fading before his eyes. He gripped the chair outside the doctor's office, whispering under his breath, "Not again. I can't lose him too." Marcus faced the diagnosis with quiet resolve. He chose to smile, even as treatment began stealing his strength. Hair thinned, appetite waned, but he insisted on lifting the family with humor rather than despair. Sitting at the table one evening, head wrapped in a scarf, he said, "I have survived rejection. I have survived grief, and I will survive this." His words carried more conviction than his body seemed to hold, yet they steadied everyone around him. Ethan, his father, and Jordan formed a rhythm of care. They rotated hospital visits, prepared meals Marcus could keep down, read aloud from books when fatigue left him too weak to focus. In those quiet hours, Marcus spoke of lessons he wanted Ethan never to forget. He reminded him that time is not promised, that love should never be hidden, and that courage is wasted if not used to defend both oneself and others. Each word sank deep into Ethan's heart, a foundation being built brick by brick, even as Marcus fought to hold on. Despite the treatments, Marcus insisted on one more act before his strength failed. He planned a trip to San Francisco during Pride, refusing to let illness rob him of celebration. Against the protests of doctors and his own faltering body, he marched with Ethan and Jordan through streets alive with rainbow flags and music. Crowds roared, colors filled the air, and for Ethan, who once thought shame would be his constant shadow, pride burned brighter than fear. Standing beside Marcus in that moment, he felt not just accepted, but radiant, as though he belonged to something far greater than himself. The return home was bittersweet. Marcus smiled as he settled back into bed, but exhaustion pulled him under quickly. Days later, he was rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. Machines hummed, monitors beeped, and Ethan clutched his hand out ere it blurred his vision. In a trembling voice, he whispered a word he had never spoken before, "Dad." Marcus's eyes glistened, the faintest squeeze of his hand acknowledging the bond that had finally been claimed. For Ethan, the lesson was seared into his soul. Love was not measured in years, but in presence. A single season of genuine care could heal wounds that a lifetime of absence had carved. Watching Marcus fight, watching him still choose joy in the face of pain, Ethan understood that family was not simply inherited, it was built, chosen, and fought for every day. Months passed in a blur of hospital visits and cautious hope. Against the odds, Marcus began to recover. His strength returned little by little, his laughter no longer forced, his appetite growing stronger. Wisps of new hair softened his once bare scalp, and his eyes carried the same warmth that had anchored Ethan through storms. For the first time in years, their home felt steady, not because life was perfect, but because one held its ground. Spring turned to summer, and with it came milestones. Ethan graduated high school, walking across the stage as his father and Marcus cheered from the front row. Their applause rose above the rest, echoing with pride. For Ethan, the diploma was not just paper, it was proof that he had survived loss, endured cruelty, and risen with resilience. Jordan remained by his side, their bond deepening from teenage sparks into something enduring. Together they dreamed of futures filled with possibility. When the day came to exchange vows, it was not in some grand cathedral, but in the quiet of a backyard garden. Strings of lights hung between trees, flowers bloomed, and close friends gathered. At the heart of it all stood Marcus, chosen to officiate, his voice thick with emotion. He spoke not as a preacher, but as a man who had lived through abandonment, illness, and healing. From loss, we find love. From pain, we find strength. And from the courage to embrace one another, we create family. His words carried across the garden, landing in Ethan's chest like a permanent flame. The night before the ceremony, Ethan had discovered something that unraveled him completely. A letter, sealed and tucked away in a drawer Marcus thought he might never need. Written during treatment, when the outcome was uncertain, it was accompanied by a legal document, papers finalizing Ethan's adoption. Marcus's handwriting was steady despite the pain he must have felt. "Ethan, you are not only your father's son, you are my son too. Family is not written in blood, it is written in love. No matter what happens, you will always belong." Tears blurred Ethan's vision as he clutched the papers. On the wedding day, when Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder and called him my son aloud before all, the words no longer felt symbolic. They were truth, sealed by law, bound by devotion. Ethan embraced both his father and Marcus in front of the guests, holding them tightly as if to anchor the moment forever. As vows were exchanged and rings slipped into place, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him there, a boy broken by loss, a young man rebuilt by compassion, and finally we're showing someone strong enough to choose love openly. What once felt like an ending had become the foundation of a new beginning. The lesson was undeniable: pain does not define us, but what we do with it does. Family may falter, life may wound, but love steady, quiet, unwavering has the power to heal what we thought unfixable. And now I ask you, if you were Ethan, would you have found the strength to open your heart again after so much loss? Tell me in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more powerful journeys of love, courage, and redemption. Because here, every story reminds us love can heal the deepest wounds.